Thank you for joining me as I continue my examination of the book The Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel from my atheist perspective. In this video, we're going to cover Chapter 4, Where Science Meets Faith. Strobel begins by describing a 1985 conference on science and religion that took place in Dallas, Texas. Among the members of an atheism versus theism discussion panel was the legendary astronomer Allan Sandage, who, as Strobel tells it, set the room abuzz by taking a seat alongside the theists. When he addressed the audience, he explained that he believed the Big Bang was a supernatural event that points to the existence of something that transcends the material universe. It was my science, Sandage said in an interview later, that drove me to the conclusion that the world is much more complicated than can be explained by science. Sandage was only one of the impressively credentialed, respected scientists to speak for the theist side that day. They said that science and religion were not opposites. They did not need to be enemies, and that science was pointing toward life and the universe itself having a grand designer. Well, a couple of points before we get to Strobel's interview for this chapter. Allan Sandage was indeed a legendary astronomer, and he earned every bit of his reputation. He did very influential work on the formation of galaxies and the age of the universe, some of which led him to conclusions that turned out to probably be wrong, but which also led others to get what are probably the right answers. And he co-discovered the first quasar. He was a giant. His work had more of an influence and pushed cosmology forward more than the work of most other individuals. He was absolutely a giant and a legend in cosmology. And Sandage did convert to Christianity, and he did say what Strobel quotes him saying here. But he converted in 1983, I believe. Maybe it was still new and unknown enough in 1985 to set the crowd abuzz at a religion versus science conference, but I suspect Strobel is overstating how shocking it was for Sandage to be on the theist side there. Maybe I'm wrong, that's just the impression I get. Also, Strobel uses Sandage's theism to add credibility to his own arguments, and those his interview subject is about to make. But from what I can tell, going by his writings and statements, Sandage would not have agreed with much of what Strobel and his chosen so-called experts are saying in this book. For example, Sandage was intrigued by the notion of God as the great designer. He did say things to indicate that he thought nature was too complex to have come to its present state without some kind of supernatural help. But when he was interviewed for the book Science and the Spiritual Quest in 2002, he also said this about people who claim to have evidence for the claims of their religion. Quote, "I don't think there is any evidence. It is faith, not reason. If there's proof, faith is not needed. But that doesn't mean I'm enamored with fundamentalist theology. I've studied the question of hermeneutics and actually went to a fundamentalist church to see exactly what they were saying, and it angered me tremendously because they ridiculed evolution. They say the earth is only 6,000 years old. In their course of hermeneutics, they had the 7 laws of interpretation of the scriptures. And I said, well, there has to be an 8th law, that wherever the scriptures are fundamentally at odds with scientific evidence, then one must change one's hermeneutics of interpretation such that you can accommodate both." Now, as an atheist, I would suggest that, you don't have to adjust your interpretation of the scripture. You could also conclude that the scripture isn't scripture at all, but just a book written by people, and that its claims to divinity are false, which I suppose in a way is altering your interpretation of it. But aside from that, Sandage's position is very clear. When the well-established findings of science contradict the claims of religion, science wins. Religious faith isn't built on evidence. So science can throw religious beliefs into question, but religious beliefs can't or shouldn't throw science into question. Sandage, I don't have it in my script, but I'm just remembering, Sandage also made it quite clear that he did not believe that you could infer anything about the creator, whoever or whatever it was, by simply pointing out that there must have been a beginning to the universe, or there must have been a first cause. He says, even if you do believe that there must have been a first cause and that that cause must have been supernatural, outside of the natural world, outside of the universe, you still can't infer anything about the nature of that cause or the creator or whatever it was that made that happen, which would be very interesting for William Lane Craig to hear, because he believes that you can infer a whole bunch of stuff about the first cause or the creator from the fact of the event itself. Sandage, one of the great cosmologists in history, says, nope, can't do that. Anyway, Strobel doesn't mention any of that when he brings up Sandage. But even if Sandage had been a young Earth creationist, granted he wouldn't have been as respected of a scientist as he was, but maybe we can pretend that when he converted to Christianity in 1983, he also converted to creationism. Even if that had happened, which it most definitely didn't, it still would not have mattered. Strobel could hammer away at the supposed significance of this titan of astronomy, recognizing that the hand of God was truly behind it all, but that titan of astronomy is still just one person. As we discussed in the last video, the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community is that evolution is a fact, that the universe is billions of years old, and that it is not necessary to assume the existence or participation of any god or anything supernatural to explain anything. Even if Charles Darwin had recanted his theory of evolution on his deathbed, he didn't. But even if he did, it would have made no difference. Other scientists accepted the facts of evolution not because they trusted Darwin's opinion or because Darwin said so, but because his opinion was backed by evidence that they could examine themselves and see how he got to his conclusions and decide whether or not they felt that his conclusions, his opinions about the evidence were supported and were reasonable. Even if Darwin's last words were, "I was wrong, God done did it," the evidence would still be there. Science doesn't operate on the personal authority of individual scientists. It operates according to evidence and a logical method. Allan Sandage was one of the greatest astronomers of his or any generation, but he wasn't perfect. As I said previously, some of his most high-profile conclusions are now rejected by the majority of scientists. His estimated value of the Hubble constant was never in line with the scientific consensus. His estimated age of the universe was much, much older than the currently accepted figure of about 14 billion years. He was probably wrong about those things. He was right about a lot of other things, but he was also probably wrong about the existence of God. Now, Sandage died in 2010. This book was first published in 2004. Sandage continued to work as a research scientist, to do research and to publish that research in peer-reviewed journals practically up until the end of his life, until he couldn't do it anymore. So this book, Case for a Creator, was originally published in 2004, which means presumably Strobel could have chosen to interview Sandage for this book. But who are we kidding? Even if Sandage would have been willing and able to talk to him, Strobel wouldn't have been interested. A respected scientist who was also a Christian, who believed firmly that the universe was billions of years old, that evolution was a fact, and that while science and religion didn't have to conflict with each other, when they did, one should defer to science? He wouldn't have been an ideal subject for this book. He would have been an ideal subject for the book Strobel claims he wrote, but not for this one, not for the book he actually wrote. That's why he interviewed Stephen Meyer instead. Stephen Meyer, the interview subject for this chapter, is a creationist. He's written numerous books promoting intelligent design and purporting to debunk evolution. He's the creator of the Teach the Controversy strategy, whereby creationists try to force creationism into public school science classes by lying about how controversial evolution is among scientists. As Strobel notes, Meyer is also a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute. But Steve, wasn't Jonathan Wells who Strobel interviewed in the previous chapter, also affiliated with the Discovery Institute? Yes, that's true. But Steve, if Lee Strobel is serious about conducting a serious journalistic investigation into whether or not modern science supports the conclusion that God exists and plays a necessary role in the operations of nature, why would he devote 2 consecutive chapters to interviews with representatives of the same widely discredited creationist think tank instead of talking to, anyone from a legitimate scientific institution? That is an excellent question. Strobel begins by asking Meyer if he believes science is, as Richard Lewontin called it, the only begetter of truth. No, Meyer says. In fact, the statement, science is the only begetter of truth, is self-defeating because you can't test it by the scientific method. Oh, Roadrunner tactic. Roadrunner tactic alert. So, what method is Meyer going to use other than the scientific method to discover truth? And how is he going to verify that what he thinks is true is actually true? I'd love to know how he's going to verify that with something other than the scientific method, particularly in light of the fact that Meyer and other advocates of intelligent design insist that what they are doing is science. If what they're doing is science, why this need to say, oh, and by the way, science isn't the only begetter of truth, There's other ways you can find stuff out about the world besides science. And I think that's an important point that we should all accept. And now back to my science. Well, of course, science teaches us important things about the natural world, Meyer says, but some of the things science teaches us also point to something beyond themselves, that something being God. Does Meyer believe science and Christianity are destined to be ever at war with each other? On the contrary, Meyer believes science supports what he calls a robust case for theism. Only theism, Meyer insists, provides an intellectually satisfying causal explanation for the evidence supporting theism. Now, I fucked up there a little bit. I misspoke. So with my interrupted flow of speech, you might not have caught that. So I want to run that back just in case you missed it. I was paraphrasing what Meyer was saying there, but yes, he actually said only theism provides satisfying explanations for the evidence supporting theism. Here, I'll read the quote verbatim. Meyer explains that traditionally there are 2 ways of viewing the relationship of science and religion, fundamentally at odds with each other or dealing with separate and distinct realms. Then Meyer says to Strobel, quote, however, I personally take a third approach, which is that scientific evidence actually supports theistic belief. In fact, across a wide range of the sciences, evidence has come to light in the last 50 years which, taken together, provides a robust case for theism. Only theism can provide an intellectually satisfying causal explanation for all of this evidence. Only theism can explain where the evidence for theism comes from. It sounds a bit circular. Probably should have come up with a better way of phrasing that. Also, pretty sure cognitive bias can explain where a lot of that so-called evidence comes from. Also, whether you agree with Meyer depends very much on how intellectually satisfying you find it to declare there must have been a first cause to everything and then pretend you know what that first cause was, because that is essentially what Meyer and other people who make this same argument are doing. Strobel asks for examples of this evidence, this robust case for theism. Meyer responds, well, there was a true beginning of the universe, which cosmologists now agree there was, and that implies a cause that transcends the universe. There are the laws of physics being fine-tuned to permit life, as physicists are discovering, which suggests a fine-tuner. There is the origin of life, which points to something beyond the material realm as an intelligent cause. Well, most scientists do not accept that the Big Bang, which was the beginning of our universe, implies the existence of a transcendent first cause of any kind, much less God. Most scientists also do not believe the laws of physics are intelligently, purposefully fine-tuned to permit life, nor do they believe that the origin of life is a question that demands looking beyond the natural world for an answer. Meyer is either lying or woefully misinformed as to the present scientific consensus on those issues. Or, and this is probably what he's doing, he is giving the opinions of creationists, such as himself, more weight than the opinions of the overwhelming majority of scientists, because he's shamelessly biased and he doesn't actually care what scientists who disagree with him say or how many of them there are. At least not in this case. He'll care about it in a little bit. Just wait, we'll come back to this question of whether or not the scientific consensus matters. Meyer concedes that Stephen Jay Gould's concept of non-overlapping magisteria, of science and religion being concerned with just separate realms that don't cross over, is partially valid. Science does deal with many questions that religion isn't equipped to answer. Questions that, as Galileo said, tell you how the heavens go, not how to go to heaven. But there are also scientific questions that do have significant ramifications for religion. For example, questions of origins. If natural explanations are sufficient to explain where everything came from, then, as Meyer says, theism becomes an unnecessary hypothesis. You know, someone truly committed to scientific truth wouldn't allow that to influence their conclusions. Creationists and apologists often toss that out there. They say, if there's a natural explanation for everything, there's no need for God. Right. And? I mean, I understand having an emotional reaction against that if you're invested in there being a God, and that's fine. But don't pretend you care about science and facts if you're prepared to ignore the ones that tell you your religion might be wrong. That's the kind of bias that scientists are trained to try and overcome, to correct for. If the evidence suggests that your favorite hypothesis is wrong, a good scientist has to suck it up and say, okay, my favorite hypothesis is probably wrong. I better try to figure out something else. You don't ignore the evidence that disproves your hypothesis and say, oh, my hypothesis has got to be true, though. It's the best explanation. That's not science. You're not doing science, or at least you're not doing good science at that point. But anyway, that is a bit off the point. Sorry about that. Meyer is talking about non-overlapping magisterias, and he goes on to say that some religious claims also cross over into the realm of science. For instance, Christianity's Nicene Creed, which includes many factual claims. The existence of God, factual claim. God being the maker of heaven and earth, factual claim. Jesus Christ existing and being God's only Son, Jesus being born of a virgin, being crucified, buried, and then resurrected, all factual claims. All claims of things that actually occurred in history. Well, here's the thing. Meyer is correct that science and religion do have some overlapping territory. When a religion makes a factual claim, a claim that could be tested scientifically, a claim that is, in theory at least, falsifiable, then that is an overlap. Science can explore that question. And when a scientific finding has implications for a given religious belief, that's also an overlap. However, I don't think the fact that these two realms have some unavoidable crossover means that they are on equal footing on all subjects. If a religion makes a factual claim that conflicts with established, well-supported science, sorry, religion loses. Scientists who have good evidence for this are under no obligation to consider this over here, which has no evidence supporting it, just because it's the tenet of a religion. That's not how it works. The fact that some Christians believe their Bible is also a science book or a history book doesn't mean that it's a good science book or a good history book, or that non-Christians or people doing work that has nothing to do with Christianity have to pretend that it is a good science or history book. By the same token, science has no authority to dictate to religious believers how they ought to interpret and live out their faith. Though I will add to that point that if believers care about respecting and accepting the truths revealed by science, as many do, then there are certain interpretations of religious faiths that they ought to reject outright, because those interpretations directly conflict with the facts about the world that we have discovered through science. You can believe whatever you want. You don't have to recognize and accept the findings of science. But if you do, that does limit the religious beliefs you can accept as well. Well, Meyer declares that science, done right, points toward God. And done right means done under the presumption that God exists and Christianity, as interpreted by Stephen Meyer, is the one true religion, I'm assuming. Strobel asks Meyer to list a half-dozen examples of how science points toward theism. Meyer's first example is the Big Bang. Most scientists, Meyer says, now believe that energy, matter, space, and time had a beginning. This is profoundly anti-materialistic, he says, and means that naturalism is on hard times in cosmology. Except that's not what most scientists think. Yes, the Big Bang is now among the most well-substantiated and universally accepted theories in the history of science. So well-substantiated, in fact, that most creationists also accept it, or at least say they accept it. And when they start describing it, it turns out they have no idea what it actually says, but they make a show of accepting it. And the Big Bang does say that the universe had a beginning. But most scientists do not believe that the Big Bang is profoundly anti-materialistic in the sense that it implies a necessary supernatural cause. Most scientists would not agree that naturalism is on hard times in cosmology. By the way, notice how selective they are about appealing to the scientific consensus. When they're touting creationism, Strobel and Meyer act as though the scientific consensus doesn't exist or doesn't count. They want you to be far more impressed by the 900 or so creationists who are also credentialed scientists than by the thousands and thousands and thousands of credentialed professional scientists who say that creationism is pseudoscience. But when they think they can use it to make a point in their favor, oh, hey, most scientists now believe it's one thing to run a shell game. It's another to be this bad at it. Meyer says that general relativity points to the need for a cause that transcends time, space, matter, and energy. And he adds, theism affirms the existence of such an entity, namely God. Well, see, you can't argue with that. General relativity says that theism is true. That's what he just implied, right? Even if general relativity did point toward a transcendent cause of the Big Bang, the fact that theism affirms the existence of an entity that could be that cause is meaningless because that affirmation is baseless. A theist can say science points toward a transcendent cause for the beginning of the universe and theism provides us with such a cause, but if they don't have evidence to establish that one, their God actually exists, and two, was actually the cause of the Big Bang, it's just an unsubstantiated claim. And unsubstantiated claims are easy. Watch. The transcendent cause of the beginning of our universe was a magic unicorn. Science demands that the universe must have had a first cause beyond time, space, matter, and energy, and the magic unicorn transcends all of those things. I have no evidence for the magic unicorn, but it does perfectly satisfy the demands of general relativity, as interpreted by me, a person not qualified to interpret it, and given how important the question is and the ramifications it carries for our lives in this world and potentially eternity. The magic unicorn runs a sweet afterlife, by the way, but only her friends are allowed in. Should we really dismiss the magic unicorn theory out of hand? Can you afford to be that arrogant? Meyer's next example of science pointing toward theism is the fact that the laws of physics and universal constants have been fine-tuned to allow life to exist in the universe. Well, he's just charging through the greatest hits of creationism, ain't he? I've covered this in previous An Atheist Read series more often than I can count at this point, so to summarize briefly why the fine-tuning argument is a bad argument, it places things that exist in the universe in a more prominent position than the universe itself. How is it possible that the conditions of the universe are just right to allow for life as we know it to exist? If you take the anthropocentrism out of that question, how can the universe possibly be tuned just right for our needs? If you take that out, what you're left with is a fairly obvious observation. The things that exist in the universe are things that are able to exist under the conditions of the universe. And that is exactly what we should expect to find. It's not a mystery at all. It's not nearly as profound as Meyer thinks it is, or at least it's not profound in the same way he thinks it is. A creationist asking how it can be that the conditions of the universe are just right to allow us to exist is not that different from the puddle of water Douglas Adams once described, marveling at how the hole it sat in was just the right shape for it. Third example, the origin of life and the complexity of DNA. When Strobel pushes back ever so gently, asking if Meyer is making an argument from ignorance, Meyer responds, quote, "This is not an argument from ignorance," Meyer insisted. "We're not inferring design just because the naturalistic evolutionary theories all fail to explain information. We infer design because all those theories fail, and we know of another causal entity that is capable of producing information, namely intelligence. Personally, I find this to be a very strong argument indeed." It's not necessary to assume the origin of life required an intelligent creator. At its most fundamental level, life is a chemical process, or rather a series of chemical processes, a incredibly complex series of chemical processes. The fact that we don't yet know precisely how the processes of life first began on this planet doesn't mean that scientists are stumped and must now assume that a god must have been responsible. But Meyer insists that it's not an argument from ignorance because they actually know of an entity that would be capable of creating life with this level of complexity, and that is intelligence. But he's not just talking about any intelligence, because he's already said that human intelligence can't explain it, and presumably that human intelligence will be proven to be incapable of replicating it. No, he's talking about the intelligent God that all his arguments are designed to point to, except there's no evidence suggesting that Meyer's God did anything or even exists, which brings us back to my magic unicorn, because my magic unicorn created life, you know. It touched some slime with its magic horn and poof, life. It's pretty incredible. One last point. Observing that potential causes exist for a particular effect or a particular feature isn't even a good argument if the cause you're referring to does actually exist. You still need more. You still need evidence to tie your potential cause to the effect you're saying it caused. If someone is stabbed to death and the detectives don't have any evidence to link any specific individual to the crime, they can't just say, "Hey, what about that guy Carl who works at the deli? He's got a knife. Maybe he did it. Let's go arrest him." I mean, they could. It's just not a very good idea. It's not very good investigation, is what I'm saying. Fourth example. Irreducible complexity in biological organisms. As Meyer puts it, biological machines need all of their parts to function. But how could such complex systems evolve if they don't function until all the parts are present? Well, I've said this before. Lots of people have said this. Irreducible complexity does not exist in the sense that Meyer describes it. It is true that there are biological systems that wouldn't function, or at least wouldn't function in the same way, if they didn't have all of their present parts. But that doesn't mean such systems couldn't have evolved naturally. The irreducible complexity of their present condition is not a barrier to them having arisen naturally. Evolution doesn't work one piece at a time. That may be how unteachable simpletons like Ray Comfort think it works. How did sex evolve? What did the first man do while he was waiting around for natural selection to create the first woman? But that's not how it actually works. The individual parts of a complex system could have evolved simultaneously. The system as it exists now may be the result of certain parts taking on a different function than one they had in the past, or of the system losing parts that were present in previous generations. Meyer and other advocates of irreducible complexity insist that the presence of irreducible complexity suggests that such systems are designed. But even if that were true, and it's not, let's just be clear, the fact that a system appears irreducibly complex does not point toward design, but let's just say that it does. They ignore other factors that suggest such systems are not intelligently designed. Just because a biological system works, that doesn't mean it works as well as it could if it were intelligently designed. Some biological systems have extraneous parts, unnecessary redundancies, parts that work but just barely. Different organisms have features that do the same basic job but in different ways, or one does the job much better or more efficiently than the other. If we're going to seriously consider the question of whether or not organisms are intelligently designed, we need to acknowledge the attributes that point away from design, not just the ones that creationists like Meyer say point toward it. And to be fair to Meyer and Strobel, they do come back to this a bit later in the chapter. So, fifth example of evidence for the robust case for theism is the Cambrian Explosion, already covered by Jonathan Wells in the previous chapter. Myers states it in terms of being an argument for design rather than an argument against Darwinism, but he basically repeats what Wells said. Lots of new organisms appeared all at once. I'll repeat myself too, but briefly. The sudden appearance of new organisms or new forms in the Cambrian Explosion took place over about 20 million years, which is not a huge amount of time on the evolutionary time scale, but is still 20 million years. There's still plenty of time for what happened during the Cambrian Explosion to have happened. It wasn't like somebody snapped their fingers and boom, new organisms everywhere. It took time to happen. Nothing about it breaks any rules of Darwinism. It's a very important and fascinating part of the fossil record and of natural history, but it doesn't break evolution, and it doesn't demand the participation of an intelligent designer in order to account for it. Sixth example, human consciousness. Judaism and Christianity teach that humans are more than material beings. We are made in God's image. Where does consciousness come from? Why do we have the ability for language, for creativity, for self-reflection? Meyer says theism provides the best explanation. You know, the big difference between Meyer's theism and my magic unicorn hypothesis is that I just made up the magic unicorn hypothesis a few minutes ago. They have exactly the same explanatory power. If the best explanation you have is that an entity you can't show exists did it, you don't have an explanation. Asking where did consciousness come from to suggest God must be responsible is an argument from incredulity, fallacious, and still no evidence. Meyer spends the next several pages restating the case that he's just spent most of the chapter making, helpfully prompted by Strobel. Based on the evidence you've mentioned, how do you complete the case for God? Hard-nosed, objective journalist searching for the truth. Strobel asks Meyer what he considers to be the standard of proof when it comes to proofs for God, and Meyer describes his method of making a case for God without relying on deductive proofs, because there aren't any. He argues that when confronted with competing hypotheses for the same phenomenon, we choose the one with the most explanatory power, and since theism can explain everything, it's the best hypothesis. Meyer says to Strobel, quote, "When we look at the evidence I've mentioned from cosmology, physics, biology, and human consciousness, we find that theism has amazing explanatory scope and power. The existence of God explains this broad range of evidence more simply, adequately, and comprehensively than any other worldview, including its main competitors, naturalism or pantheism. And the discovery of corroborating or supportive evidence is accelerating." No, it's not. Sure, Meyer thinks his God has the most explanatory power of any hypothesis, but that's only because he doesn't know that the magic unicorn is not merely a god, but a super god. That means she not only created the universe and life, she also created Meyer's God. And since the magic unicorn, her name is Stacy, by the way, not only explains everything Meyer's God's hypothesis does, but also explains where Meyer's God came from, which Meyer can't explain, I'd say it's the best explanation. Especially seeing as we don't need actual evidence tying the explanation to the thing it's explaining, just a vague sense that it could have gone that way. But if God is such a great explanation for everything, how come so many scientists either don't believe in God personally or don't believe God played any necessary role in creating or setting up the universe or creating or designing life? How come so many Christians who are scientists don't believe it's necessary to include God in their work, in their theories, in their explanations of how things go? Well, Meyer has a few suggestions about that. First, lots of these scientists might not know about the amazing discoveries that point toward theism as the best explanation for everything. And sure, how could they? None of these discoveries are published in peer-reviewed journals. Also, naturalism is now the default worldview, and people are punished for dissenting from it. You know what would help people dissent from naturalism? Any evidence at all for anything else. This is like a conspiracy theorist complaining that people who think 9/11 was an inside job don't get any respect from the mainstream scientific establishment. No kidding. It's a crackpot theory with no evidence to support it. I wonder why it doesn't get any respect. Strobel writes that Meyer's last point about people being punished for dissenting from naturalism reminded him of a quote by Allan Sandage about how believers are reluctant to reveal themselves in the scientific community because, as Sandage put it, the opprobrium is so severe. Also, Strobel did some research to pull quotes from Sandage, did he? I wonder if he ran across this one. Quote, "It seems to me that scientists and theologians have climbed closely adjacent but different peaks. When each has reached their separate summits, they can view one another, even exchange arguments and claims of hegemony over one another, but they are not close enough to one another for either to play king of the other's mountain." That is Allan Sandage from his essay, Science and Religion, Separate Closets in the Same House, in the aforementioned book, Science and the Spiritual Quest. So it's kind of funny, isn't it? It's funny how Strobel is happy to quote Sandage in support of his narrative, even though it's very likely that Sandage would have rejected the legitimacy of Strobel's entire enterprise. Strobel does bring up the argument that some systems appear to be poorly designed, that they don't work as well as they might work. Meyer actually denies that some features proposed as being of poor design are actually that bad. He says, they're not as bad as people say they are. And then he concludes by saying that since the Bible teaches that nature has deteriorated from its pristine original condition due to the entrance of evil into the world, we shouldn't expect nature to be perfect. It's the creationist equivalent of the good stuff is God, the bad stuff is our fault. See, the appearance of design in a living organism, well, of course, that's God. God designed everything. That points to God. The appearance of design points to God. How can you deny that? Oh, but if you see something in the natural world that looks way too poorly designed to be the work of a divine intelligence, well, that's our fault. It probably worked perfectly when God originally designed it, but then, original sin, sorry, we're the ones who messed that up. Not a point against the God hypothesis. Notice how Meyer has no reluctance at all to appeal directly to the Bible to support his argument, within the context of what is being framed as a scientific discussion. We've been told for years, by Meyer, by others, that intelligent design is not creationism, it's not religion, it's not Christianity, it's a legitimate scientific theory. That's what they say. That's why they call it intelligent design instead of creationism. They say, no, this is different. This is science. This isn't religion. And here's one of its leading advocates responding to a criticism of his design points to a designer argument by turning straight to the pages of the Bible. In doing so, he's also demonstrating his unscientific methodology. He thinks he can refer to the Bible to counter a challenge to his supposedly scientific position because he's already decided before he conducted any kind of scientific investigation, that the Bible is the Word of God and an unquestionable authority. He's not starting with the evidence and reasoning forward. He's starting with the conclusion, God did it, and reasoning backward, filling in the gaps between the evidence and his theory with Scripture as necessary. Strobel spends the last section of the chapter allowing Meyer to pontificate unchallenged on how the so-called evidence for theism has strengthened his own faith, as opposed to the rest of the chapter where he allowed Meyer to pontificate with minimal token challenges. And Strobel also gushes about how awesome Meyer is, at one point describing him as having an endearing blend of a professor's academic depth combined with an advocate's savvy and an enthusiast's winsome earnestness. Down, boy. A journalist who only cares about the truth. And actually, that's it for this chapter. So, up to this point in the book, we've now had 2 consecutive chapters devoted to interviewing fellows of the Discovery Institute and 2 consecutive chapters where the Cambrian Explosion is cited as evidence for God and mischaracterized in the process. Can we get to 3 in a row? Let's go for it. In the next video, I will cover the next chapter of the book, which is Chapter 5, The Evidence of Cosmology, Beginning with a Bang. I don't know. I think they can still shoehorn the Cambrian Explosion into that somehow. I'm not sure. I haven't read ahead, but I wouldn't count out the 3 in a row bet just yet. Anyway, that's it for this chapter. That's it for this video. Thank you all, as always, for watching. If you have anything to say in response to what I have had to say, whether you agree with me or you disagree with me, whether you are an atheist or a Christian or some other category of believer or non-believer, please do leave a comment on this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know your reaction to what my reaction to this book is. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on my thoughts. And also, I want to remind everyone, as always, that your support allows me to continue to do this, to make these videos specifically, and to make all the videos that I make across this channel. And your support through Patreon is absolutely essential to me continuing to do this work and continuing to be able to do this work. So if you enjoy these videos I make and you can afford it and you think I'm worth it, you can go to www.patreon.com/Steve Shives and become a patron of this channel for as little as $1 a month. And boy, that really helps me out. If you can afford it and you want to pledge more, if you pledge $5 a month or higher, you can take advantage of some extra little perks in the campaign, including getting a sneak peek at scripts for the Atheist Reads videos a day or 2 before the videos go up on YouTube for people to watch. That's a nice little bonus that I throw in there for people who go a bit above and beyond the basic level. So to all of you, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your support, whether you are a patron or considering becoming a patron, or you're not a patron, you just enjoy watching the videos. I appreciate all of you and all your support in whatever form it comes, and I'll see you next time.